In the turbulent decades of the Cold War, a clandestine operation known as Operation Condor was conceived, weaving a web of state terror across South America. This secret alliance of right-wing dictatorships aimed to eradicate left-wing opposition, often with the silent backing of the United States. Join us as we uncover the dark legacy of Operation Condor. In the fraught geopolitical landscape of the Cold War, South America became a critical theater for the ideological battle between capitalism and socialism. This clash of ideologies gave rise to Operation Condor, a covert network of right-wing dictatorships united in their mission to eliminate left-wing opposition. The origins of this sinister alliance are rooted in the political upheaval and the pervasive fear of communism that gripped the continent during the mid-20th century. The genesis of Operation Condor can be traced back to the early 1970s, a period marked by intense political volatility across South America. Countries like Chile, Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, Paraguay, and Bolivia experienced significant social and political unrest. Left-wing movements, inspired by socialist and communist ideologies, gained substantial momentum, challenging the entrenched power of right-wing military and civilian governments. These movements were often fueled by widespread social inequalities, economic hardships, and the desire for radical political change. Amidst this backdrop, right-wing military leaders perceived the rise of left-wing ideologies as an existential threat to their control and the stability of their nations. The fear of communism, which had been exacerbated by the Cuban Revolution in 1959, and the subsequent establishment of a communist regime under Fidel Castro, loomed large. The United States, under the sway of the domino theory, believed that the fall of one nation to communism would trigger a cascade effect, toppling neighboring countries like dominoes. Consequently, the U.S. was deeply invested in preventing the spread of socialism in its hemisphere, providing substantial support to right-wing regimes in South America. The groundwork for Operation Condor was laid during a series of clandestine meetings between the intelligence agencies of these South American countries. These meetings aimed to establish a framework for mutual cooperation in combating left-wing subversion. The most pivotal of these gatherings occurred in November 1975 in Santiago, Chile. Representatives from Chile, Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, Paraguay, and Bolivia convened to formalize their collaboration. This meeting was convened by Manuel Contreras, the head of Chile's notorious secret police, the Dirección de Inteligencia Nacional, DINA. Contreras, a staunch anti-communist and close ally of Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet, was instrumental in shaping the strategic vision of Operation Condor. During the Santiago meeting, the participating countries agreed to share intelligence, coordinate military and security operations, and provide mutual assistance in tracking, apprehending, and eliminating perceived threats. This agreement marked the official inception of Operation Condor, setting the stage for a brutal campaign of state terror. The alliance was structured to operate through a sophisticated network of intelligence agencies and security forces, each playing a specific role in the execution of the operation. Central to this structure was a shared database of individuals deemed to be subversive, which included political dissidents, activists, intellectuals, and anyone suspected of left-wing sympathies. This database facilitated the rapid exchange of information and allowed for coordinated actions across national borders. The inception of Operation Condor also involved the establishment of secure communication channels and regular meetings among the heads of the participating intelligence agencies. These meetings served to refine strategies, assess ongoing operations, and ensure the alignment of objectives. The high level of coordination and the shared commitment to eradicating left-wing opposition underscored the ruthlessness and determination of the alliance. While the South American dictatorships were the primary architects and executors of Operation Condor, the United States played a crucial and controversial role. The U.S. government, driven by its Cold War strategy to contain communism, provided significant support to these regimes. This support included training for military and intelligence personnel, financial aid, and the provision of sophisticated surveillance and interrogation equipment. The Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, was deeply involved in supporting Operation Condor, often working closely with the intelligence agencies of the participating countries. Declassified documents have revealed that the CIA and other U.S. agencies were aware of the human rights abuses committed under Operation Condor, but chose to prioritize geopolitical interests. The U.S. saw these regimes as critical allies in its broader strategy to maintain influence in the region and prevent the spread of communism. The U.S. support for Operation Condor was part of a broader pattern of Cold War-era interventions in Latin America. This pattern included covert operations to overthrow democratically elected governments perceived as left-leaning, such as the 1954 coup in Guatemala and the 1964 coup in Brazil. These interventions were justified under the guise of protecting national security and maintaining regional stability, but they often resulted in significant human rights violations and long-term political instability. The formation of Operation Condor represented a convergence of national and international interests, driven by a shared anti-communist ideology and a willingness to employ extreme measures. The participating regimes viewed themselves as the last line of defense against a perceived tide of communism, justifying their actions as necessary to preserve their nations and the Western Hemisphere. The United States, for its part, saw these regimes as essential partners in its global strategy, providing tacit or explicit support, despite the mounting evidence of atrocities. As Operation Condor took shape, it became clear that the alliance was not merely a reactive measure, but a proactive and preemptive strategy to eliminate any potential threats to the established order. The participating countries began to implement coordinated campaigns of repression, targeting political opponents with unprecedented brutality. These campaigns were marked by widespread surveillance, arbitrary arrests, torture, and extrajudicial killings, all conducted with a high degree of secrecy and impunity. The origins of Operation Condor thus lie in a complex interplay of domestic and international factors. The fear of communism, the desire for political and social control, and the strategic interests of the United States all contributed to the creation of this clandestine network. The initial meeting in Santiago was just the beginning of a dark chapter in South American history, one that would see thousands of lives destroyed in the name of ideological warfare and geopolitical strategy. In conclusion, the origins of Operation Condor are deeply rooted in the political and ideological conflicts of the Cold War. The formation of this clandestine alliance was driven by the fear of communism, the desire for control by right-wing dictatorships, and the strategic interests of the United States. The secret meeting in Santiago in 1975 marked the formal inception of Operation Condor, setting the stage for a coordinated campaign of state terror across South America. This chapter in history highlights the lengths to which governments will go to maintain power and control, often at the expense of human rights and democratic principles. Operation Condor, once established, quickly evolved into a well-coordinated, transnational campaign of repression that employed a range of brutal tactics to eliminate perceived threats. The execution of the operation involved extensive surveillance, abductions, torture, and extrajudicial killings, orchestrated with a level of sophistication that made it one of the most formidable and sinister alliances of the Cold War era. At the heart of Operation Condor was a sophisticated network of intelligence agencies from Chile, Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, Paraguay, and Bolivia. These agencies collaborated closely, sharing intelligence and coordinating operations to track, capture, and eliminate dissidents. The central hub for this network was based in Santiago, Chile, where the Dirección de Inteligencia Nacional, DINA, led by Manuel Contreras, played a pivotal role in organizing and directing activities. One of the key strategies employed by Operation Condor was the creation of a centralized database that listed individuals deemed to be subversive. This database included the names of political activists, intellectuals, students, union leaders, and anyone suspected of harboring left-wing sympathies. The database allowed participating countries to share information about targets seamlessly, facilitating cross-border operations and ensuring that no dissident could find safe haven by fleeing to a neighboring country. The operational tactics of Condor were marked by their brutality and efficiency. Dissidents were often abducted in broad daylight, whisked away to secret detention centers where they were subjected to intense interrogation and torture. These detention centers, known as black sites, were scattered across the participating countries and were notorious for their inhumane conditions. Victims were frequently held without trial, and many were never seen again, becoming part of the growing number of desaparecidos, or disappeared persons. The methods of torture used under Operation Condor were horrific and varied. Techniques included electric shocks, waterboarding, beatings, and psychological torture designed to break the will of prisoners and extract information. The goal was not only to gather intelligence, but also to instill fear and deter others from opposing the regime. The brutality of these methods reflected the regime's determination to crush dissent by any means necessary. Extrajudicial killings were another grim hallmark of Operation Condor. Once deemed irredeemable or too dangerous, many dissidents were executed, their bodies often disposed of in unmarked graves or dumped in rivers. In some cases, victims were thrown from airplanes into the ocean in a method known as death flights. These tactics were intended to erase any trace of the victims and prevent their families from seeking justice or closure. The transnational nature of Operation Condor meant that its reach extended far beyond the borders of any single country. The participating regimes coordinated closely to track and eliminate dissidents who had fled abroad. Exiles in Europe and the United States were not safe from the long arm of Condor. One of the most notorious examples of Condor's global reach was the assassination of Orlando Letelier, a former Chilean diplomat and prominent critic of Augusto Pinochet. On September 21, 1976, Letelier was killed in a car bombing in Washington, D.C., along with his colleague, Ronnie Moffett. The assassination, carried out on American soil, sent shockwaves through the international community and highlighted the extent to which Condor operatives were willing to go to silence opposition. Declassified documents later revealed that Dina, with the possible complicity of the CIA, had orchestrated the assassination, demonstrating the brazen and far-reaching capabilities of Operation Condor. The role of the United States in supporting and facilitating Operation Condor cannot be overstated. While the U.S. was not officially a member of the alliance, it provided critical support through intelligence sharing, training, and financial assistance. The CIA, in particular, played a significant role, offering training in counterinsurgency techniques and providing equipment that was used in surveillance and interrogation operations. The U.S. saw these military regimes as vital allies in its Cold War strategy, and this support continued despite mounting evidence of human rights abuses. Declassified U.S. government documents have revealed the extent of American involvement and awareness of the atrocities committed under Operation Condor. Memos and reports from the CIA and the State Department show that U.S. officials were well aware of the human rights violations, but chose to prioritize geopolitical interests over ethical considerations. This complicity has been a source of enduring controversy and criticism, particularly among human rights advocates who argue that the U.S. bears significant responsibility for the suffering caused by Condor. The coordinated efforts of Operation Condor also involved significant logistical and tactical planning. Regular meetings were held among the heads of the participating intelligence agencies to discuss strategy, share intelligence, and coordinate operations. These meetings ensured that the alliance operated with a high degree of synchronization, allowing for rapid and decisive actions against perceived threats. The level of planning and coordination demonstrated the regime's commitment to maintaining control and eliminating opposition. The secrecy surrounding Operation Condor was another critical aspect of its execution. The regimes involved went to great lengths to conceal their activities, using code names, secure communication channels, and clandestine operations to avoid detection. This secrecy extended to the use of false identities and forged documents to facilitate cross-border operations and prevent the identification of operatives. The cloak of secrecy made it difficult for human rights organizations and the international community to document and respond to the abuses being committed. Despite the extensive efforts to maintain secrecy, information about Operation Condor began to leak out over time. Survivors who escaped detention and families of the disappeared started to speak out, providing testimonies about the atrocities they had witnessed. Human rights organizations, both within South America and internationally, began to gather evidence and advocate for justice. These efforts slowly chipped away at the wall of silence, bringing the horrors of Operation Condor to light. One of the most significant revelations about Operation Condor came from the discovery of the Archives of Terror in Paraguay in 1992. These documents, found in a police station in Asunción, provided detailed records of the activities of the Paraguayan secret police and their involvement in Condor operations. The archives included lists of victims, records of torture, and correspondence between Condor operatives. This discovery provided concrete evidence of the scale and brutality of Operation Condor, prompting renewed calls for accountability and justice. The execution of Operation Condor was marked by a level of coordination and brutality that made it one of the most effective and feared alliances of its time. The network of intelligence agencies, the centralized database of dissidents, and the sophisticated methods of surveillance, abduction, and torture created a climate of fear and repression that stifled opposition and allowed the participating regimes to maintain their grip on power. The involvement and support of the United States added a layer of complexity and controversy, highlighting the geopolitical dimensions of the operation. In conclusion, the execution of Operation Condor was a highly coordinated and brutal campaign of repression that targeted left-wing opposition across South America. The network of intelligence agencies, the centralized database of dissidents, and the methods of abduction, torture, and extrajudicial killings created a climate of fear and repression. The transnational nature of Condor extended its reach far beyond the borders of any single country, while the involvement and support of the United States added to the complexity and controversy surrounding the operation. The secrecy and brutality of Condor left a legacy of trauma and impunity that continues to be felt in the region to this day.
The role of the United States in Operation Condor is a complex and controversial aspect of the operation's history. While the U.S. was not an official member of the alliance, its involvement was pivotal in shaping and the repressive actions carried out by the South American dictatorships, the motivations behind the extent of its involvement, and the ethical implications of this support are critical to understanding the broader context of Operation Condor.
During the Cold War, the United States was deeply invested in containing the spread of communism. The fear of communism's expansion was driven by the domino theory, which posited that if one country fell to communism, neighboring countries would follow in a domino effect. This theory heavily influenced U.S. foreign policy, leading to interventions around the world to support anti-communist regimes and suppress leftist movements. In Latin America, the U.S. saw the rise of socialist and communist movements as a direct threat to its interests and regional stability. The Cuban Revolution in 1959, which resulted in the establishment of a communist regime under Fidel Castro, was a significant turning point. The revolution demonstrated that a communist government could take hold in the Western Hemisphere, heightening U.S. fears of similar movements spreading throughout Latin America. In response, the U.S. ramped up its efforts to support right-wing military regimes that could act as bulwarks against communism. The United States provided extensive support to the South American dictatorships through various means. One of the primary forms of support was the training of military and intelligence personnel. The School of the Americas, located in Fort Benning, Georgia, was a key institution where Latin American military officers received training in counterinsurgency techniques, intelligence gathering, and interrogation methods. Many of the officers who played significant roles in Operation Condor were graduates of this institution. The training emphasized anti-communist strategies and equipped these officers with the skills needed to carry out repressive operations. In addition to training, the U.S. provided financial aid and military assistance to the regimes involved in Operation Condor. This support included the provision of weapons, surveillance equipment, and other resources necessary for conducting intelligence and counterinsurgency operations. Financial aid helped bolster the regime's capabilities and maintain their grip on power. The U.S. justified this support as essential for maintaining regional stability and preventing the spread of communism. The Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, played a particularly significant role in supporting Operation Condor. The CIA had a long history of involvement in Latin America, including orchestrating coups and supporting anti-communist forces. In the context of Operation Condor, the CIA provided critical intelligence sharing and technical assistance. Declassified documents have revealed that the CIA maintained close relationships with the intelligence agencies of the Condor countries, facilitating the exchange of information about suspected leftist activists and dissidents. One of the most controversial aspects of U.S. involvement in Operation Condor is the extent to which American officials were aware of the human rights abuses being committed. Declassified memos and reports indicate that U.S. officials were well aware of the widespread torture, extrajudicial killings, and disappearances carried out under Condor. Despite this knowledge, the U.S. continued to provide support, prioritizing geopolitical interests over human rights considerations. This complicity has been a source of enduring criticism and has tarnished the legacy of U.S. foreign policy in the region. The assassination of Orlando Letelier, a former Chilean diplomat, in Washington, D.C. in 1976, is a stark example of the lengths to which Operation Condor operatives would go and the controversial role of the United States. Letelier was a vocal critic of Augusto Pinochet's regime in Chile and had become a prominent figure in the international human rights community. On September 21, 1976, Letelier and his colleague, Ronnie Moffett, were killed in a car bombing orchestrated by DINA, Chile's secret police. The assassination, carried out on American soil, highlighted the global reach of Condor and the audacity of its operatives. The assassination of Letelier prompted an investigation by the FBI, which uncovered connections between DINA and right-wing Cuban exiles in the U.S. who had facilitated the attack. Declassified documents later revealed that the CIA had foreknowledge of Condor's plans to carry out assassinations abroad, but did little to prevent them. The Letelier assassination brought international attention to Operation Condor and raised serious questions about U.S. complicity in the human rights abuses perpetrated by its allies. The United States' involvement in Operation Condor must be understood within the broader context of its Cold War strategy. The U.S. prioritized the containment of communism above other considerations, including human rights. This strategy led to a series of alliances and interventions that had profound and often devastating impacts on the countries involved. In the case of Operation Condor, U.S. support for repressive regimes facilitated widespread atrocities and left a legacy of trauma and impunity. The ethical implications of U.S. involvement in Operation Condor have been the subject of extensive debate. Critics argue that the U.S. bears significant responsibility for the human rights abuses committed by the Condor regimes, given the level of support and complicity. They contend that the U.S. should have leveraged its influence to curb the excesses of its allies and promote respect for human rights. Instead, the U.S. chose to overlook these abuses in the pursuit of its strategic objectives. In recent years, there have been calls for greater transparency and accountability regarding U.S. involvement in Operation Condor. Human rights organizations and advocacy groups have pushed for the declassification of all relevant documents and for a full accounting of the U.S. role in supporting the Condor regimes. These efforts aim to provide a clearer understanding of the extent of U.S. complicity and to promote accountability for the atrocities committed. The legacy of U.S. involvement in Operation Condor continues to influence contemporary discussions about foreign policy and human rights. The case of Condor serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of prioritizing strategic interests over ethical considerations. It highlights the need for a foreign policy that balances security concerns with a commitment to human rights and democratic values. The lessons of Condor are particularly relevant in the current global context, where the U.S. continues to navigate complex geopolitical challenges. In conclusion, the role of the United States in Operation Condor is a critical and controversial aspect of the operation's history. Driven by Cold War fears of communism, the U.S. provided extensive support to the Condor regimes, including training, financial aid, and intelligence sharing. Despite awareness of the human rights abuses being committed, the U.S. prioritized its strategic interests, contributing to the widespread atrocities perpetrated under Condor. The assassination of Orlando Letelier and other actions highlighted the global reach and audacity of Condor operatives. The ethical implications of U.S. involvement continue to be debated, and there are ongoing calls for greater transparency and accountability. The legacy of U.S. involvement in Operation Condor serves as a powerful reminder of the need to balance strategic objectives with a commitment to human rights and democratic principles. The human cost of Operation Condor was enormous and devastating, leaving a legacy of trauma, loss, and unresolved grief across South America. The victims of Condor were numerous and diverse, encompassing political activists, intellectuals, students, trade unionists, and ordinary citizens suspected of opposing the military regimes. The brutal tactics employed by Condor left deep psychological and emotional scars on survivors and the families of the disappeared, many of whom continue to seek justice and closure decades later. One of the most harrowing aspects of Operation Condor was the widespread use of enforced disappearances. Thousands of individuals were abducted from their homes, workplaces, and public spaces, often in broad daylight, by state security forces. These individuals were taken to secret detention centers, where they were subjected to brutal interrogation and torture. Many were never seen again, their fates unknown, leaving their families in a perpetual state of uncertainty and anguish. The term desaparecidos, the disappeared, became a haunting symbol of this period of terror. The psychological impact on the families of the disappeared cannot be overstated. The absence of information about the fate of their loved ones created a tormenting ambiguity, a state described by psychologists as ambiguous loss. This unresolved grief hindered the ability of families to mourn and move forward, as they were trapped in a cycle of hope and despair. Many families engaged in tireless searches for information, often risking their own safety to demand answers from the authorities. The lack of accountability and the pervasive culture of impunity added to their suffering. Survivors of Condor's detention centers, known as torture centers, provided chilling testimonies of the inhumane conditions and the methods of torture used. These centers, which were scattered across the participating countries, operated in secrecy and with little regard for human rights. Victims were subjected to electric shocks, waterboarding, beatings, and psychological torture designed to break their will and extract information. Women were often subjected to sexual violence and abuse, adding another layer of trauma to their ordeal. One of the most infamous torture centers was the ESMA, Escuela de Mecánica de la Armada, in Buenos Aires, Argentina. The ESMA became a symbol of the brutality of the Argentine dictatorship, where thousands of detainees were tortured and many were killed. Survivors of the ESMA have recounted horrific stories of their treatment, describing a regime of constant fear and dehumanization. The testimonies of these survivors have been crucial in documenting the crimes committed and seeking justice for the victims. The scale and systematic nature of the repression under Operation Condor extended beyond torture and disappearances. Extrajudicial killings were a common tactic used to eliminate perceived threats. Victims were often executed and their bodies disposed of in unmarked graves or dumped in rivers and oceans to avoid detection. One particularly gruesome method was the death flights, where victims were drugged, placed in aircraft, and thrown into the sea while still alive. These tactics were intended to instill terror and prevent any organized resistance. The reach of Operation Condor was not limited to the borders of the participating countries. Exiles who had fled to Europe and North America were also targeted. High-profile assassinations of exiled dissidents were carried out with chilling precision, demonstrating the global reach of Condor. The murder of Orlando Letelier in Washington, D.C., orchestrated by Chilean secret police, DINA, is one of the most notorious examples. Letelier, a vocal critic of Pinochet's regime, was killed by a car bomb along with his colleague, Ronnie Moffett. This assassination on U.S. soil highlighted the lengths to which Condor operatives would go to silence opposition. The impact of Operation Condor on South American societies was profound and long-lasting. The pervasive fear and repression stifled political dissent and curtailed civil liberties. The military regimes used state terror to maintain control, suppressing any form of opposition with ruthless efficiency. This climate of fear had a chilling effect on political activism and civic engagement, leaving a legacy of mistrust and trauma. Efforts to seek justice for the victims of Operation Condor have been ongoing but fraught with challenges. In the immediate aftermath of the dictatorships, many perpetrators enjoyed impunity, protected by amnesty laws and a lack of political will to pursue accountability. However, the tireless efforts of survivors, families, and human rights organizations gradually began to shift the tide. Truth commissions were established in several countries to investigate the human rights abuses committed during this period. One of the most significant developments in the pursuit of justice was the creation of the National Commission on the Disappearance of Persons, CONADEP in Argentina, which produced the landmark report Nunca Más, Never Again. This report documented the widespread human rights abuses committed during the Argentine dictatorship and provided a comprehensive account of the methods of repression used. The testimonies collected by CONADEP were instrumental in raising awareness and demanding accountability. Legal proceedings against former officials involved in Operation Condor have seen varying degrees of success. In Argentina, a series of trials known as the Trials of the Juntas in the mid-1980s resulted in the conviction of several high-ranking military officers for their roles in human rights abuses. However, many perpetrators initially escaped justice due to amnesty laws enacted in the late 1980s. These laws were eventually repealed, and in the 2000s, new trials were held, leading to further convictions. In Chile, efforts to prosecute those responsible for human rights abuses have been more complicated. Augusto Pinochet, the dictator who ruled Chile from 1973 to 1990, managed to avoid prosecution for many years, benefiting from a self-granted amnesty and his position as senator for life. However, Pinochet's arrest in London in 1998, under an international warrant issued by Spanish judge Baltasar Garzón, marked a turning point. Although Pinochet was eventually released on health grounds and returned to Chile, his arrest signaled that accountability was possible, even for high-ranking officials. In Uruguay, Paraguay, and Brazil, the process of seeking justice has been slower and more fragmented. These countries have faced significant obstacles, including political resistance and a lack of institutional support for human rights investigations. Nevertheless, human rights organizations and activists continue to push for accountability and the recognition of the victims' suffering. International human rights organizations have played a crucial role in supporting these efforts and bringing global attention to the legacy of Operation Condor. Groups such as Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and the International Center for Transitional Justice have provided advocacy, legal support, and documentation to aid in the pursuit of justice. Their efforts have helped to keep the memory of the victims alive and to hold perpetrators accountable. The legacy of Operation Condor extends beyond the immediate victims and their families. The repression and violence of Condor left a deep psychological scar on South American societies, contributing to a pervasive culture of fear and mistrust. The authoritarian regimes undermined democratic institutions and eroded public trust in government, creating challenges for the transition to democracy in the post-dictatorship era. Rebuilding democratic institutions and restoring public trust has been a long and difficult process. Efforts to promote transitional justice, such as truth commissions and reparations programs, have been crucial in addressing the legacies of repression and fostering reconciliation. These initiatives aim to acknowledge the suffering of the victims, provide redress, and ensure that the atrocities of the past are not forgotten. Education and public memory play a vital role in this process. Museums, memorials, and educational programs have been established to preserve the history of Operation Condor and educate future generations about the dangers of state terror and the importance of human rights. The Memory and Human Rights Museum in Santiago, Chile, and the ESMA Museum in Buenos Aires are examples of institutions dedicated to documenting and commemorating the victims of repression. In conclusion, the human cost of Operation Condor was immense, leaving a legacy of trauma, loss, and unresolved grief. The victims included a wide range of individuals targeted for their political beliefs and activism. The brutal tactics of enforced disappearances, torture, and extrajudicial killings inflicted deep psychological scars on survivors and their families. Efforts to seek justice and accountability have faced significant challenges, but have made important strides in recent years. The legacy of Condor serves as a powerful reminder of the need to uphold human rights and democratic values, and to ensure that such atrocities are never repeated. The ongoing pursuit of justice and the preservation of memory are essential for healing and reconciliation, both for the victims and for society as a whole. Operation Condor had profound and lasting effects on the political landscape of South America, deeply influencing the region's governance, social structures, and collective memory. The pervasive atmosphere of fear and repression that characterized Operation Condor left indelible marks on the societies involved, shaping their political trajectories for decades to come. Understanding the full impact of Condor requires examining both the immediate and long-term consequences on South American politics and society. One of the most immediate impacts of Operation Condor was the entrenchment of military dictatorships in South America. The coordinated campaign of repression allowed these regimes to consolidate their power and eliminate political opposition with brutal efficiency. The systematic targeting of dissidents, activists, and perceived enemies of the state created a climate of fear that stifled political dissent and civic engagement. This repression ensured that the military regimes faced little resistance as they implemented their authoritarian policies. In countries like Chile, Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, Paraguay, and Bolivia, the military regimes used the tools of state terror to dismantle democratic institutions and suppress any potential threats to their authority. Political parties, labor unions, and civil society organizations were often banned or heavily restricted. The press was censored, and any form of opposition was met with swift and often violent retaliation. This repression extended beyond political actors to include intellectuals, academics, and cultural figures, effectively silencing a broad spectrum of society. The pervasive use of torture and enforced disappearances under Operation Condor had a chilling effect on political activism. The fear of being abducted, tortured, or killed deterred many from speaking out or participating in political activities. This suppression of dissent created a political vacuum, allowing the military regimes to govern without significant challenges to their authority. The lack of political pluralism and the absence of robust democratic institutions contributed to the longevity of these regimes, some of which remained in power for decades. The repression and violence of Operation Condor also had significant economic and social implications. The military regimes often pursued neoliberal economic policies, characterized by privatization, deregulation, and austerity measures. These policies were aimed at stabilizing the economy and attracting foreign investment, but often resulted in increased inequality and social unrest. The suppression of labor unions and the dismantling of social welfare programs exacerbated economic disparities, leading to widespread poverty and disenfranchisement. The impact of these economic policies was felt most acutely by the working class and marginalized communities, who bore the brunt of the austerity measures. The repression of labor movements and the weakening of workers' rights made it difficult for these groups to advocate for better wages and working conditions. The social fabric of these countries was further strained by the lack of access to basic services and the erosion of social safety nets. The long-term political impact of Operation Condor became evident in the transition to democracy that swept through South America in the late 1980s and 1990s. The fall of the military regimes and the restoration of civilian rule marked a significant turning point. But the legacy of repression and authoritarianism posed substantial challenges to the democratization process. The newly established democracies had to grapple with the remnants of the military regimes, including entrenched political and economic elites, weakened democratic institutions, and a society scarred by years of violence and fear. One of the key challenges in the transition to democracy was the need to address the human rights abuses committed under Operation Condor. The quest for justice and accountability became a central issue, as survivors and families of the disappeared demanded recognition and redress. Truth commissions were established in several countries to investigate the abuses and provide a historical record of the atrocities committed. These commissions played a crucial role in uncovering the truth and fostering a national dialogue about the past. In Argentina, the National Commission on the Disappearance of Persons, CONADEP, produced the landmark report, Nunca Más, Never Again, which documented the widespread human rights abuses committed during the dictatorship. The report provided a detailed account of the methods of repression used, including testimonies from survivors and families of the disappeared. The work of CONADEP and other truth commissions helped to raise awareness about the scale of the atrocities and laid the groundwork for legal proceedings against those responsible. The pursuit of justice for the victims of Operation Condor faced significant obstacles, including political resistance and legal barriers. Many of the perpetrators initially enjoyed impunity, protected by amnesty laws and a lack of political will to pursue accountability. In Argentina, the trials of the juntas in the mid-1980s resulted in the conviction of several high-ranking military officers, but subsequent amnesty laws hindered further prosecutions. It was not until the early 2000s that these laws were repealed, allowing for renewed efforts to hold perpetrators accountable. In Chile, the process of seeking justice was complicated by the continued influence of Augusto Pinochet, who remained a powerful figure even after stepping down from the presidency. Pinochet's self-granted amnesty and his position as senator for life shielded him from prosecution for many years. However, his arrest in London in 1998 under an international warrant issued by Spanish judge Baltasar Garzón marked a significant turning point. Although Pinochet was eventually released on health grounds and returned to Chile, his arrest signaled that accountability was possible, even for high-ranking officials. The legacy of Operation Condor also had profound implications for the political culture of South America. The experience of state terror and repression left a deep mistrust of government and political institutions. Rebuilding public trust and fostering a culture of democratic participation became critical challenges for the new democracies. Efforts to promote transparency, accountability, and the rule of law were essential for strengthening democratic governance and preventing a return to authoritarianism. The legacy of Condor has also influenced contemporary political movements and human rights advocacy in the region. The memory of the repression and the struggle for justice have become central themes for many social movements, shaping their agendas and informing their strategies. Human rights organizations, survivors, and families of the disappeared continue to play a vital role in advocating for justice and preserving the memory of the atrocities committed. Education and public memory have been crucial in addressing the legacy of Operation Condor. museums, memorials, and educational programs have been established to document and commemorate the victims of repression. These institutions serve as important sites of memory, providing a space for reflection and learning. The Memory and Human Rights Museum in Santiago, Chile, and the ESMA Museum in Buenos Aires are notable examples of efforts to preserve the history of state terror and educate future generations about the importance of human rights. The impact of Operation Condor on South American politics extends to the international arena as well. The transnational nature of the repression and the involvement of multiple countries have highlighted the need for international cooperation in addressing human rights abuses. Efforts to seek justice and accountability have often involved collaboration between national and international human rights organizations, as well as the use of international legal mechanisms. The case of Operation Condor has also contributed to the development of international human rights law and the principle of universal jurisdiction. The idea that certain crimes, such as torture and enforced disappearances, are so egregious that they can be prosecuted anywhere in the world, has gained traction in the wake of Condor. The arrest of Pinochet in London, under the principle of universal jurisdiction, was a landmark moment, demonstrating that former heads of state could be held accountable for human rights abuses regardless of where the crimes were committed. In conclusion, the impact of Operation Condor on South American politics was profound and multifaceted. The repression and violence used to eliminate political opposition entrenched military dictatorships and stifled democratic institutions. The transition to democracy brought significant challenges, including the need to address the human rights abuses committed under Condor and rebuild public trust in government. Efforts to seek justice and accountability have faced numerous obstacles, but have made important strides in recent years. The legacy of Condor continues to influence contemporary political movements and human rights advocacy, highlighting the importance of preserving memory and promoting democratic values. The case of Condor has also had significant implications for international human rights law, demonstrating the need for global cooperation in addressing and preventing atrocities. The story of Operation Condor serves as a powerful reminder of the resilience of those who fight for justice and the enduring importance of human rights and democracy. The quest for justice for the victims of Operation Condor has been a long and arduous journey, marked by significant legal, political, and social challenges. The pursuit of accountability for the atrocities committed during this dark period has involved a complex interplay of national and international efforts, driven by survivors, families of the disappeared, human rights organizations, and a few determined legal professionals. The ongoing quest for justice is not only about holding perpetrators accountable, but also about healing, recognition, and ensuring that such atrocities are never repeated. In the immediate aftermath of the fall of the military dictatorships, many perpetrators of human rights abuses enjoyed impunity. In Argentina, for example, the military regime enacted self-amnesty laws in 1983, just before the transition to democracy. These laws were intended to shield military officials from prosecution for crimes committed during the dictatorship. Similar measures were taken in other countries, such as Chile, where Augusto Pinochet's regime passed an amnesty law in 1978, which protected those involved in human rights violations. The initial response to these amnesty laws was one of frustration and despair among survivors and the families of the disappeared. However, these communities refused to accept impunity and began to mobilize, demanding justice and accountability. One of the most significant movements to emerge from this struggle was the Madres de Plaza de Mayo, Mothers of the Plaza de Mayo, in Argentina. Founded in 1977, this group of mothers and relatives of the disappeared began holding weekly marches in front of the presidential palace in Buenos Aires, demanding answers about the fate of their loved ones. Their courage and persistence drew international attention to the plight of the disappeared and the need for justice. In Argentina, the quest for justice gained significant momentum with the establishment of the National Commission on the Disappearance of Persons, CONADEP, in 1983. CONADEP was tasked with investigating the human rights abuses committed during the dictatorship and documenting the cases of enforced disappearances. The Commission's final report, titled Nunca Más, Never Again, provided a comprehensive account of the atrocities and played a crucial role in raising awareness both domestically and internationally. The report's findings were instrumental in the subsequent trials of the juntas, which led to the prosecution and conviction of several high-ranking military officers. The trials of the juntas, held in the mid-1980s, were a landmark moment in the pursuit of justice for Operation Condor's victims. These trials marked the first time that top military officials were held accountable for their actions, and they set a precedent for future prosecutions. The trials were broadcast on national television, allowing the public to hear testimonies from survivors and witnesses, which further galvanized the demand for justice. Despite these successes, the trials faced significant backlash, and in 1986 and 1987, the Argentine government passed the Full Stop Law and the Due Obedience Law, which effectively halted further prosecutions and granted immunity to many lower-ranking officials. The struggle for justice continued in the face of these setbacks. Human rights organizations, survivors, and activists persisted in their efforts to overturn the amnesty laws and bring perpetrators to justice. In the early 2000s, these efforts bore fruit when the Argentine Supreme Court declared the amnesty laws unconstitutional, paving the way for renewed prosecutions. Since then, hundreds of former military officials have been tried and convicted for their roles in the dictatorship's human rights abuses. In Chile, the pursuit of justice was similarly complex and fraught with challenges. The legacy of Augusto Pinochet, who remained a powerful political figure after stepping down from the presidency, posed a significant obstacle. Pinochet's self-granted amnesty and his position as senator for life provided him with substantial legal and political protection. However, the tide began to turn with his arrest in London in 1998. The arrest, under an international warrant issued by Spanish Judge Baltasar Garzón, was a groundbreaking moment in the fight for justice. Although Pinochet was eventually released on health grounds and returned to Chile, the arrest demonstrated that no one was beyond the reach of the law. Pinochet's arrest galvanized human rights advocates in Chile and around the world. It highlighted the potential for international legal mechanisms to hold perpetrators accountable and inspired similar efforts in other countries. In Chile, the arrest led to a renewed focus on prosecuting human rights abuses committed during the dictatorship. Several high-profile cases have resulted in the convictions of former military officials, and efforts to investigate and prosecute these crimes continue to this day. The pursuit of justice for Operation Condor's victims has also involved significant international cooperation. Human rights organizations, legal professionals, and activists have worked together across borders to document abuses, provide legal assistance, and advocate for accountability. The principle of universal jurisdiction, which allows for the prosecution of serious crimes such as torture and genocide regardless of where they were committed, has been a crucial tool in these efforts. The use of universal jurisdiction in the arrest of Pinochet and subsequent cases has set important legal precedents and underscored the international community's commitment to justice. Efforts to seek justice have not been limited to legal proceedings. Truth commissions have played a vital role in uncovering the truth about the atrocities committed under Operation Condor and providing a platform for survivors and families to share their stories. In addition to Argentina's CONADEP, other countries in the region have established their own truth commissions. In Chile, the National Commission for Truth and Reconciliation, REDIG Commission, and the National Commission on Political Imprisonment and Torture, VALIC Commission, have provided comprehensive accounts of the human rights abuses committed during Pinochet's regime. These truth commissions have been instrumental in raising awareness about the scale and nature of the abuses, providing a historical record, and promoting national reconciliation. The testimonies collected by the commissions have been essential for legal proceedings and have helped to ensure that the memories of the victims are preserved. The work of truth commissions has also highlighted the importance of acknowledging and addressing the suffering of survivors and families as a crucial step toward healing and justice. Reparations programs have been another important aspect of the quest for justice. These programs aim to provide financial compensation and other forms of support to survivors and families of the disappeared. Reparations are not only a means of acknowledging the harm suffered, but also an essential component of restorative justice. In Argentina, the government has implemented several reparations programs, including pensions for the families of the disappeared and compensation for survivors of torture. Similar programs have been established in other countries, though the extent and effectiveness of these efforts vary. Memorialization and education are critical elements in the ongoing quest for justice. Preserving the memory of the victims and educating future generations about the atrocities committed under Operation Condor are essential for ensuring that such abuses are never repeated. Museums, memorials, and educational programs serve as important tools for remembrance and learning. The Memory and Human Rights Museum in Santiago, Chile, and the ESMA Museum in Buenos Aires are prominent examples of institutions dedicated to documenting and commemorating the history of state terror. Public memory initiatives often involve survivors, families, and human rights organizations working together to create spaces for reflection and education. These initiatives help to foster a culture of human rights and democratic values, emphasizing the importance of accountability and justice. They also provide a means for society to confront its past and work toward reconciliation. The quest for justice for the victims of Operation Condor is ongoing, and significant challenges remain. Political resistance, legal obstacles, and the passage of time all complicate efforts to hold perpetrators accountable. However, the determination and resilience of survivors, families, and human rights advocates continue to drive the pursuit of justice. Their efforts have achieved significant successes, and the ongoing struggle serves as a testament to the power of collective action and the enduring importance of justice and human rights. In conclusion, the quest for justice for the victims of Operation Condor has been a long and difficult journey, marked by significant legal, political, and social challenges. The pursuit of accountability has involved a complex interplay of national and international efforts, driven by the determination of survivors, families, and human rights organizations. Despite numerous obstacles, important strides have been made in holding perpetrators accountable, uncovering the truth, and providing reparations and recognition for the victims. The ongoing efforts to seek justice and preserve memory are essential for healing and ensuring that the atrocities of the past are never repeated. The legacy of Operation Condor serves as a powerful reminder of the resilience of those who fight for justice and the enduring importance of human rights and democracy. The legacy of Operation Condor is a profound and multifaceted one, leaving deep scars across South America and shaping the region's political, social, and cultural landscape for generations. The effects of this dark chapter in history are still felt today, influencing contemporary politics, human rights advocacy, collective memory, and efforts toward justice and reconciliation. Understanding the full extent of Operation Condor's legacy requires examining the long-term consequences on various aspects of society and the ongoing efforts to address and heal from the past. One of the most significant aspects of Operation Condor's legacy is the impact on the political landscape of South America. The brutal repression and state terror employed by the military regimes during Operation Condor left an indelible mark on the region's political systems. The consolidation of power by these regimes stifled political dissent and undermined democratic institutions, leading to a prolonged period of authoritarian rule. The transition to democracy in the late 1980s and early 1990s marked a crucial turning point, but the legacy of repression and authoritarianism posed significant challenges to the democratization process. Rebuilding democratic institutions and fostering a culture of political participation have been critical tasks in the post-dictatorship era. The experience of state terror and the systematic dismantling of democratic structures created a climate of mistrust and fear that persisted even after the fall of the military regimes. Restoring public trust in government and promoting democratic values have required sustained efforts from political leaders, civil society organizations, and international partners. These efforts have included constitutional reforms, the strengthening of judicial systems, and the promotion of transparency and accountability in governance. The legacy of Operation Condor has also profoundly affected human rights advocacy in South America. The atrocities committed during this period galvanized the human rights movement, both within the region and globally. Human rights organizations such as Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and local groups like the Argentine Center for Legal and Social Studies, CELS, played a crucial role in documenting abuses, advocating for justice, and supporting survivors and families of the disappeared. These organizations have continued to be vital actors in promoting human rights, seeking accountability, and ensuring that the lessons of the past are not forgotten. The pursuit of justice for the victims of Operation Condor has been a central aspect of the human rights movement. Legal proceedings against former officials involved in human rights abuses have seen varying degrees of success, with significant progress made in some countries. The repeal of amnesty laws in Argentina and the subsequent prosecutions of former military officials set important legal precedents and demonstrated that accountability is possible, even decades after the crimes were committed. In Chile, the arrest of Augusto Pinochet in 1998 marked a turning point, highlighting the potential for international legal mechanisms to hold perpetrators accountable. The role of truth commissions in uncovering the truth about Operation Condor and providing a platform for survivors and families to share their stories has been instrumental in the pursuit of justice and reconciliation. These commissions have provided comprehensive accounts of the human rights abuses committed during the dictatorships and have played a crucial role in raising awareness and fostering national dialogue. The testimonies collected by truth commissions have been essential for legal proceedings and have helped to ensure that the memories of the victims are preserved. Reparations programs have been another important aspect of addressing the legacy of Operation Condor, providing financial compensation and other forms of support to survivors and families of the disappeared is a crucial component of restorative justice. Reparations programs aim to acknowledge the harm suffered, provide redress, and support the long-term recovery and well-being of survivors. In Argentina, the government has implemented several reparations programs, including pensions for the families of the disappeared and compensation for survivors of torture. Similar programs have been established in other countries, though the extent and effectiveness of these efforts vary. The legacy of Operation Condor extends beyond the political and legal realms to encompass the social and cultural dimensions of South American societies. The experience of state terror and the pervasive fear and repression have left deep psychological and emotional scars on survivors, families, and communities. Addressing these scars requires not only legal and political measures, but also efforts to promote healing and reconciliation. Mental health support, community-based initiatives, and cultural programs have been important in helping individuals and communities process their experiences and work toward recovery. Education and public memory play a crucial role in preserving the history of Operation Condor and educating future generations about the importance of human rights and democratic values. Museums, memorials, and educational programs serve as important tools for remembrance and learning. The Memory and Human Rights Museum in Santiago, Chile, and the ESMA Museum in Buenos Aires are notable examples of institutions dedicated to documenting and commemorating the history of state terror. These institutions provide spaces for reflection and education, helping to foster a culture of human rights and democratic values. Public memory initiatives often involve survivors, families, and human rights organizations working together to create spaces for reflection and education. These initiatives help to ensure that the stories of the victims are not forgotten and that the lessons of the past are passed on to future generations. They also provide opportunities for dialogue and reconciliation, helping to bridge divides and promote understanding and healing. The legacy of Operation Condor has also influenced contemporary political movements and human rights advocacy in the region. The memory of the repression and the struggle for justice have become central themes for many social movements, shaping their agendas and informing their strategies. Human rights organizations, survivors, and families of the disappeared continue to play a vital role in advocating for justice and preserving the memory of the atrocities committed. Their efforts have helped to keep the legacy of Operation Condor alive and to promote accountability and human rights in contemporary political contexts. The impact of Operation Condor extends to the international arena as well. The transnational nature of the repression and the involvement of multiple countries have highlighted the need for international cooperation in addressing human rights abuses. Efforts to seek justice and accountability have often involved collaboration between national and international human rights organizations, as well as the use of international legal mechanisms. The principle of universal jurisdiction, which allows for the prosecution of serious crimes, such as torture and genocide, regardless of where they were committed, has been a crucial tool in these efforts. The use of universal jurisdiction in the arrest of Pinochet and subsequent cases has set important legal precedents and underscored the international community's commitment to justice. The legacy of Operation Condor serves as a powerful reminder of the resilience of those who fight for justice and the enduring importance of human rights and democracy. The efforts to seek justice and preserve memory are essential for healing and ensuring that the atrocities of the past are never repeated. The ongoing struggle for accountability and recognition is a testament to the determination and resilience of survivors, families, and human rights advocates. In conclusion, the legacy of Operation Condor is profound and multifaceted, shaping the political, social, and cultural landscape of South America for generations. The impact of this dark chapter in history is still felt today, influencing contemporary politics, human rights advocacy, collective memory, and efforts toward justice and reconciliation. The ongoing quest for justice and the preservation of memory are essential for healing and ensuring that such atrocities are never repeated. The legacy of Operation Condor serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of human rights and democracy, and the resilience of those who fight for justice. The story of Operation Condor is a testament to the enduring power of collective action and the importance of remembering and learning from the past. Operation Condor stands as a testament to the brutal lengths governments will go to in the name of power, and the enduring strength of those who stand against oppression. As we reflect on this dark chapter, we are reminded of the ongoing struggle for justice and the importance of safeguarding our freedoms. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Stay informed, stay vigilant, and remember the lessons of the past to protect the future.